Big Shaq's dog barked like it saw the devil. Not once, not twice, but every time that stranger's bag appeared. What Big Shaq found inside wasn't lost luggage. It was a declaration of war disguised in silence. Hate had been planted on his doorstep, and the bark was the only alarm loud enough to save him. This wasn't just a bag, it was a signal, and the truth inside shook the whole town. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the kind of neighborhood where wind chimes sang before the birds did. Mornings moved slow, lawns stayed trimmed, kids still rode their bikes without helmets, and neighbors waved whether they knew your name or not. The sun always broke just right across the sidewalks of Pine Ridge, an upscale pocket just outside Atlanta, tucked between old pines and new promises. It was clean, it was calm, it was curated, and Shaquille O'Neal fit into it, in a way that surprised even him. Folks around Pine Ridge didn't call him Shaquille or Mr. O'Neal. Here, he was just Shaq. Or sometimes Big Shaq, depending on the mood and who was speaking. He liked it. It felt human, stripped down. He wasn't the Hall of Famer here, not the larger-than-life TV presence. He was the guy who brought extra chairs to block parties and coached middle schoolers who didn't have dads in the stands. He was the one who fixed squeaky gates with WD-40 before homeowners even noticed. Grief had softened him. Life had humbled him. And now in this place, he found a kind of peace he never got on the hardwood. Every morning just after the sun kissed the dew off the grass, he took Duke, his grizzled old Labrador mix, out for their mile-long loop. They walked the trail that curved behind the neighborhood, circling the little man-made lake, and winding past the benches, past the community garden, past the place where his wife Alina used to sit with her sketch pad before the cancer came. Shaq talked to Duke more than he talked to most people these days. Duke listened like a retired therapist. Old eyes, silver muzzle, heavy breath. Duke had seen the glory days, the hospital nights, the funeral, and everything since. They were bonded by the shared silence of those who'd known loss. And every morning, until that morning, was the same. But then came Tuesday. Shaq noticed it before Duke did. A shape, low, wide, resting under the curved metal leg of the east bench. A black duffel bag. Not torn, not new, just placed. Left there like it had meaning. Like someone expected it to be found. Duke, nose twitching, broke into a low growl before barking loud and sharp. 4 times the kind of bark that startled birds from branches. Shaq tugged gently on his leash. But Duke wouldn't move, just stared, barking harder now, like he was trying to raise the dead. Shaq's eyes narrowed. He walked slowly to the bag. Didn't touch it, just stood there. It wasn't the first time someone had left a gym bag at the park. Once it was just protein shakes and old socks. Another time, a forgotten tackle kit. But this bag, it didn't belong here. Not like that. Not on that particular bench. The one under the willow tree. The one Alina used to love. Still, he walked away. By Thursday, it was still there. Shaq felt something he hadn't in years. That bone-deep itch of suspicion. The kind that crawls behind your ears when something ain't right. Even if you can't explain why. It was too deliberate. Same position. Same distance from the edge of the bench. A neighbor, Miss Daltrey, jogging by with her visor and lemon water, smiled and said, "Probably just a forgetful teenager." Shaq nodded. Said nothing. Duke growled again. That night, Shaq lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spin, hearing Duke pacing in the dark living room. He thought about the years he'd lived trying to smile past suspicion. The times a store clerk followed him down an aisle, the way cops gripped belts tighter when they pulled him over, even after they realized who he was. Fame didn't always cancel fear. Sometimes it amplified it. He thought about the new family in House 27, the Harlans. Always polite. Too polite. The kind of people who over-explained that they didn't see color and voted for change, but never quite looked him in the eye. Thought about the HOA meetings, where his voice somehow always ended up the second one dismissed. He didn't want to believe what he was thinking. This was Pine Ridge. This was his home. He paid his dues. He showed up. He was safe here, wasn't he? Friday. The bag was there again. Duke started barking before they even rounded the corner this time. A deep, feral bark that echoed off the park trees and made a couple passing dog walkers stop and stare. Shaq walked right up to the bench and crouched down. He didn't touch the bag. But this time, He unzipped it, just a few inches, enough to peek. What he saw wasn't weapons, not explosives, not money. Inside was a white cloth folded carefully. Too carefully. He pulled a corner of it up and recognized it immediately. It was a clan hood, old fabric stained at the edges. Beneath it, an envelope. Inside the envelope were printed photos. Photos of Shaq at the grocery store, at the barber shop, at his mailbox. Candid, uncomfortable photos. Someone had been watching him. Duke whimpered. He zipped the bag shut. Stood up. Looked around. No one saw. Or if they did, they pretended not to. He carried the bag home, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he knew no one else would do anything. Because when the system doesn't believe you, you become the system. He didn't sleep that night. Didn't turn on the lights. Just sat with the bag on the kitchen table, lit only by the moonlight, through the back window. He wasn't scared. He was tired. And something else. A strange, hot shame, not his own, but left on his porch like trash that wouldn't get picked up. The next morning, he returned the bag to the bench. Let it sit. Let it be seen. Someone would come back for it. Or someone would notice. Either way, he was watching now too. And Duke never stopped barking. Not at the squirrels, or the wind, or the trees, only at the bag. That was the day Shaq learned a truth he hadn't wanted to know. Even in the quietest neighborhoods, hate can whisper. And sometimes it takes a dog to make it loud. By the fourth morning, the bag had become something more than just an oddity. It had turned into a presence. The black duffel sat like a stain on the otherwise spotless trail bench, and though no one said it aloud, Shaq could feel the discomfort curling beneath the surface of the neighborhood's usual pleasantries. Joggers adjusted their routes. Dog walkers kept their eyes down. Conversations at the community garden were more hushed now, weighted by something no one wanted to admit noticing. Shaq had tried to ignore it. 3 mornings of walking, Duke, 3 rounds of deep barks, snarls, a locked stare, the same spot, the same tension twisting in Shaq's chest. Still, he had hesitated, told himself it wasn't worth the trouble, that maybe it was just a careless jogger, or maybe someone without a home passing through. But there was something too deliberate about the bag. Its positioning, the way it never moved an inch, the way no one else dared to approach it. Duke, who barely had the energy to chase squirrels anymore, turned into a different dog around that thing. His eyes would fix on the bag like it had spoken to him in a language only dogs understood. His hackles raised, his legs stiffened, and the bark raw primal cut through the suburban calm like a warning shot. Shaq had spent most of his life learning when to step back. As a black man, even a famous one, he understood what people feared, what they tolerated, and what they chose to look away from. He had learned to smile when he didn't want to shrug off insults wrapped in politeness, and to laugh when the world demanded he play the role of gentle giant. But something about that bag refused to be shrugged off. It sat in the center of his world, like a challenge. So on that 4th morning, he walked up to it. He told Duke to sit, but the dog wouldn't. He stayed at Shaq's heel, body low, tail stiff. Shaq knelt down and unzipped the duffel halfway, just enough to see inside without disturbing anything. The smell was old fabric and faint mildew, like something that had been stored for decades. What caught his eye first was the white. He lifted a corner of it with his fingertips and froze. It was a white hood, folded and pressed, a shape that needed no introduction. He didn't need to unfold it to know what it was. The pointed top, the stitched eye holes. It was a relic from a time the country pretended had passed, but it sat in front of him now like a ghost in cloth. Beneath it, Shaq saw papers folded, yellowed, and handwritten in ink. He glanced over the top page and saw names of black families, some crossed out, some underlined, and beside one of them was his own. O'Neill. There was more. He reached down and lifted a small cloth figure, a doll, a black doll, burned and melted down the side, its face disfigured by fire or acid or both. The stitching barely held together, a red ribbon was tied around its neck. Shaq dropped it back into the bag. His mind reeled, but his body stayed calm. Years of media training and public image control kicked in, even though no one was watching. Or maybe because someone always was. He zipped the bag back up and stood slowly, feeling the weight of something ancient press against his chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was history, unspoken and inherited. He walked home without a word. Duke didn't bark again. Back at the house, Shaq set the bag on the floor in his garage, next to a box of winter coats he meant to donate. He stared at it for a long time, arms folded, his breath shallow. He didn't call the police. Not yet. This wasn't about law. Not in the way the law would understand. He'd seen what happened when you made noise about things like this. The question would be asked, why did he have it? Why had he opened it? Why didn't he report it sooner? What evidence was there that someone else had placed it there?
No, the law wasn't built to carry the weight of symbols like that. Not when they were still echoing across neighborhoods just like his.
Shaq sat in the kitchen with a pen and notepad. Wrote the names he remembered from the list. Cross-checked them with the local directory. 3 of them lived within 6 blocks. One was Miss Tennyson, a retired school teacher, whose husband had passed. Another was the Jefferson family, who hosted block movie nights in the summer. The third he didn't recognize the last name, but had seen the teenage son skateboarding near the middle school. He thought back to conversations that felt off. People who suddenly grew quiet when he approached. The glances exchanged. The extra long pauses when he asked simple questions. In hindsight, the signs were there. He just hadn't wanted to see them. Was it a warning? A threat? A message meant to scare him into silence? Or maybe it wasn't about him at all. Maybe he was just the latest name on a list that had been written decades ago, now unearthed for a new generation to carry forward. But why now? That question looped in his head for hours. He sat by the front window, watching neighbors walk by, each one now a suspect, a shadow. He didn't like the way that made him feel, but he couldn't let it go. Someone had chosen that bench, that spot, that bag for a reason, and they had included his name. He pulled out his phone, thought about calling his daughter, but changed his mind. She didn't need this in her head. She had worked too hard to build her peace. No, this burden was his, and Duke's, and maybe eventually the community's, but not hers. Later that afternoon, he drove back to the park, left the bag exactly where he'd found it. He knew someone was watching. He wanted them to know he was watching too. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of the bag, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just hatred. It was history trying to claw its way back into relevance, trying to remind people like him that no matter how many houses they owned or how much love they gave, some lines were still drawn in fear. He made a promise to himself as he stood at the edge of his yard, watching the stars fade into morning. If it showed up again, he wouldn't just open it. He'd open the whole town. Shaq had always believed that the soul of a neighborhood wasn't in its streets, but in its people. The small daily interactions that knit lives together like quiet stitches in a quilt. A nod from the man watering his begonias. A wave from the elderly couple who walked their beagle at dusk. The high schooler who always offered to carry his groceries. These were the moments that made Pine Ridge feel safe, or at least comfortable. But after the bag, everything started to taste different. Like water from a glass you just saw someone else spit into. He didn't go to the police. Not yet. Something about the silence around that bench, the way nobody asked him about the bag after he returned it, told him this wasn't a matter the badge could fix. It was deeper, older, rooted. The rot wasn't from the outside. It was growing beneath the trimmed lawns and freshly painted shutters. So Shaq started watching. He didn't change his routine. Still walked Duke every morning. Still waved. Still nodded. But his eyes stayed sharper now, and his silences were more deliberate. The friendly faces he'd trusted began to blur into a different kind of expression. Still smiling, but with a gloss that didn't feel real. Take Coach Darrow, for example. He taught gym at the local charter school. Used to talk Shaq's ear off about old Lakers versus Celtics games, and invited him once to judge a student dunk contest. Lately, Darrow didn't make eye contact. Every time Shaq passed him on the trail, he seemed to check his phone, or suddenly speed up his jog, earbuds conveniently in. One morning, Shaq waved anyway. Darrow pretended not to see. Duke barked once low, short, dismissive.
Then there was Calvin, the mailman, a wiry man, with a limp and a routine so precise, you could set your watch by it. He used to pet Duke every morning, give him a biscuit from his bag. Now he dropped the mail without a word, eyes darting past Shaq's porch like he was looking through smoke. He had once said, "You're the best thing to ever happen to this block, big man." Now he acted like Shaq wasn't even there.
Suspicion is a tricky thing. It can infect everything. But this wasn't paranoia. It was patterns. Subtle shifts. Things that didn't line up anymore. Like the Harpers. They just moved into the powder blue house on the corner 3 weeks back. Young couple. The wife, Lacey, was all smiles and lavender candles. Her husband, Trent, wore boat shoes even when he wasn't near water, and always seemed to be building something in the garage. They introduced themselves with homemade granola and a pamphlet about neighborhood safety groups. The first time Shaq met them, he noticed how tight Lacey's smile stayed when she shook his hand. Too rehearsed. And how Trent overcompensated, squeezing Shaq's palm like he had something to prove. "Big fan, sir. Big fan," he said, but his eyes darted to the tattoo on Shaq's forearm. The faded black cross Alina had once drawn on his wrist with Sharpie, now forever inked after she passed. A few days later, Shaq walked Duke past their house and caught Trent through the window, on the phone, pointing toward the street. When he saw Shaq looking, the curtain dropped fast. Too fast. Then came the lawn signs. Subtle, coded, "Protect our neighborhood. Keep Pine Ridge pure." Not overt, not illegal, but pointed, planted with pride, and always facing Shaq's yard. One afternoon, he stood by his mailbox and watched the signs swaying in the breeze. Duke sat by his side, panting. The neighborhood felt like it was shrinking, like every house was slowly turning inward, away from him. There had always been things he ignored, whispers behind closed doors, the awkward pause when he talked about Alina's art in public, the way people thanked him just enough but never invited him into their circles. Shaq was beloved in a way that was safe for them. They loved the version of him that smiled, gave back, didn't ask hard questions. But now that version didn't feel real. One night as he watered his front garden, a woman named Elise from 2 houses down walked over, holding a mason jar of sweet tea like it was a peace offering. "Heard about the strange bag at the park," she said casually, like she was talking about squirrels. "I told Trent it's probably just some kid trying to stir up drama. You know how these TikTok things go." Shaq tilted his head. Didn't think anyone noticed.
Oh, everyone noticed. Just figured it was better not to feed it, you know?
"Give it air. It grows." Shaq looked her in the eyes, slow and steady. "Some things need air, so they can rot and be removed." She blinked, shifted her weight, and handed him the jar. "Well, anyway, you take care." As she turned and walked back, Shaq poured the tea into the grass. That night, he pulled out Alina's old camera, the one she used to carry everywhere, and started taking pictures. Not of people, but of patterns, the placement of signs, the changing of glances, the group texts that popped on the neighborhood app, vague in tone but specific in suggestion. "Keep lights on late at night, unusual activity near trailhead. Be aware, unidentified man seen walking near benches." He screenshotted every one. He wasn't being paranoid. He was being watched. And the most chilling thing of all wasn't the bag or the signs or the avoidance. It was the fact that they all still smiled. Like everything was normal. Like he hadn't already been marked. Like whatever was coming, they were already rehearsed for it. It arrived like a message scrawled in silence. No footsteps, no cameras, no warning. Shaq found the second bag just after sunrise, the sky still bruised with hints of lavender and ash. He was stepping out to feed Duke, cup of black coffee steaming in his palm, when his foot stopped inches short of it. Another black duffel, this one older, more weathered than the first, frayed at the seams, taped at the zipper, left neatly, deliberately, right in the middle of his front porch like a cursed delivery. Duke didn't bark this time. He let out a low, mournful growl, backed away with his tail down, and head tilted sideways. Something about the bag made him recoil like it had a smell only he could register. Something wrong. Something unnatural. Shaq didn't pick it up. He crouched instead. Looked at it for a full minute before pulling on a pair of gloves he kept in the foyer, habit left over from old security briefings, back when his name carried more scrutiny. With gloved hands he unzipped the bag halfway. The smell of paint hit first, acrylic sharp and sour. Inside, folded like it had once belonged to someone small, was a child's hoodie, dark blue and soaked in thick red paint, dried into jagged stains that had stiffened the fabric. The hood still held its shape, as if the child who wore it had just stepped out and left it behind. Shaq pulled the hoodie out slowly. Beneath it lay a photo printed on glossy paper, creased in the corners. Alina. His Alina. It was the old portrait from their engagement shoot, in Savannah, the one she had framed and hung beside the dining table. Her smile, always too full of light, had been scribbled over with a black marker, crude and violent, like someone had tried to erase her joy, Her eyes were scratched out. A red X slashed across her chest. There was no note. No fingerprints on the plastic. No indication of who had left it or when. Just that familiar silence, stretching long and hollow across the lawn. Shaq stood there for a while, the breeze brushing against his face like it didn't know what else to do. He didn't scream, didn't drop the bag or call out. He just carried it inside, set it on the tiled floor of his foyer, and sat down across from it. Duke curled at his feet and whimpered. Something had shifted. The first bag had been a warning, a test. This was personal, intimate. Whoever had left this knew about Alini, knew what that photo meant, knew how to strike at the part of him that still hadn't healed. But when he looked out the window, the neighborhood went on like nothing happened. A jogger passed by with earbuds in, nodding politely. A gardener blew leaves off the curb across the street. Lacey Harper waved from her SUV. As she backed out of her driveway, her smile as plastic as the flowers in her yard, nobody looked at his porch. No one paused. No one asked. Later that morning, Shaq walked the bag out to his garage and sat with it again. He didn't know if he should call the police. He imagined the questions they'd ask. Why didn't you report the first bag? Why didn't you have security cameras? Are you sure no one saw you place it there yourself? That last question sat heavy in his chest, because by noon, the whispers had started. First at the corner store, where a woman in yoga pants lowered her voice when Shaq entered. Then at the gas station, where two teen boys stopped laughing the moment he stepped in and stared at him a little too long. Even Tennyson, the retired teacher he had helped after her knee surgery, hesitated when she saw him walking Duke. Her wave was delayed, her eyes uncertain. By dusk, the talk had reached the neighborhood app. Someone posted, "Weird activity at Shaq's house this morning. Hope everything's okay, but should we be concerned about the attention it's bringing?" Another comment below, "Sounds like someone trying to stir drama. I mean, 2 bags? Come on, what are the odds?" Then, "I'm not saying he's lying, but why wait to mention the first one? Feels off to me. Gaslighting doesn't always come in fire. Sometimes it slips in quietly, dressed like concern. Sometimes it sounds like neighbors with gentle voices asking the wrong questions in the right tone." Shaq stared at his screen, the posts stacking like bricks, each one walling him in further. What stung most wasn't the doubt. It was the speed of it. How quickly people turned suspicion inward. How easily they rewrote the story. The man being watched had become the one being watched for, and no one had knocked on his door. Not one person came by to ask, "Are you okay?" By evening, he took Duke for another walk. Same trail, same park. The bench was empty now, wiped clean, as if the first bag had never existed. But Shaq didn't need proof anymore. He knew what this was. It wasn't about the duffels. Not really. It was about silencing. About erasure. They hadn't just defaced Alina's photo. They were trying to erase his place in the neighborhood, undermine his credibility, make him doubt what he saw, what he felt, paint him as unstable, dangerous, even. And in their eyes, wasn't that always the play? The gentle giant turns sour. The smiling man gets too loud. The community pillar becomes the problem. Shaq returned home to find a printed flyer shoved into his mailbox. No words. Just a photo of a noose drawn in heavy pencil, the rope frayed and twisting. This time he didn't take it inside. He pinned it to his front door. He didn't care if it scared the neighbors. He wanted them to see what he saw. Wanted them to feel the tension walking past their own homes. Just once. Let them clutch their keys tighter. Let them fumble for words. Let them know. That night, Duke howled for 3 hours straight. Not barking. Not whining. Howling. Like he was mourning something already lost. The room smelled like lemon-scented floor polish and cheap coffee. Folding chairs lined the walls of the Pine Ridge Community Hall, the flags neatly arranged behind the HOA board table. These meetings were usually dry. A parade of landscaping proposals, noise complaints, budget approvals. Shaq had sat through dozens of them, mostly silent, sipping lukewarm water and nodding politely. But tonight wasn't about lawn height or dog leash policies. Tonight he brought the bag. He placed it carefully on the center table, as murmurs rose like static around the room. Some recognized it. Others just stared. A few leaned back, visibly annoyed that their Wednesday evening had veered off script. Shaq didn't speak right away. He stood there, hands steady, gaze locked forward. "I'm not here for drama," he began, voice low but clear. I'm here because something dangerous is growing in our neighborhood, and we're pretending not to see it. The room stilled. A few looked down. Most waited for whatever came next with clenched jaws and folded arms. This bag showed up on my porch. Inside was a child's hoodie soaked in red paint, and a defaced photo of my late wife. He paused, letting it hang. No note, no fingerprints, just hate and silence. For a few seconds, the only sound was the flicker of the old ceiling lights. Then came the voice of Howard King, a longtime resident with a buzz cut and a pensioner's restlessness. Shaq, no offense, but are we sure this wasn't some kind of prank? Teenagers do wild things these days. You can't assume the worst. Shaq stared at him. You think teenagers left a Klan hood in the park? You think kids targeted the black families on our block with printouts and burned dolls? A woman near the snack table shifted. We're just saying it might be a misunderstanding. It's not, Shaq said, sharper now. And it's not the first time. Another bag was left at the trail last week. Same tone. Same message. Nobody reported it. Nobody asked. You all saw me find it, and you looked the other way. From the back, another voice rose. Daniel Crowley. Early 30s. Clean shave. Crisp polo. The kind of man who smiled with too many teeth and always talked a little too loud at barbecues. Shaq had once mentored him through a youth program when Daniel's own father had skipped town. Now his tone carried something colder. Look, Big Shaq, we respect what you've done for this place, Daniel said. But you're turning this into a circus. Every little thing doesn't have to be about race. Shaq blinked slowly, like he'd been slapped, but expected it. It is about race when the threats target only the black families here. When the signs in front of my house change overnight. When people post about unusual activity like I'm a stranger, Daniel shrugged. Or maybe you're just being paranoid. Hell, maybe you're playing it up. That photo? Anyone could have printed that. Maybe someone looking for attention. The words settled heavy. Shaq didn't move, didn't flinch. He just looked at the people around him, faces he'd mowed lawns for, whose kids he'd given sneakers to, whose homes he helped rebuild after a storm. They all looked distant, politely vacant, as if his pain had made them uncomfortable enough to reject it. It's not attention I'm after, Shaq said quietly. It's safety. For me, for Duke, for the kids on this block who look like me. The HOA president, a middle-aged woman named Margaret who once asked Shaq to sponsor a community fundraiser, cleared her throat. Maybe, she said, we should form a task group to look into neighborhood safety protocols. Cameras, lights, neighborhood watch. No, Shaq interrupted. This isn't about motion lights. This is about truth. I'm not asking you to fix it for me. I'm asking you to stop pretending it's not happening. That did it. Someone toward the left muttered, loud enough for effect. Here we go again. Another voice. He's trying to be a martyr. Shaq stepped back from the table. The bag remained. So did the weight of everything unsaid. He didn't yell. He didn't defend himself further. He looked at the people he'd called neighbors for 6 years. People who once called him a pillar. And realized something he hadn't wanted to admit, not even after the bag. They didn't want his truth. They wanted his silence. They wanted him soft, helpful, funny. They wanted his smile, not his story. His charity, not his experience. The moment he stepped outside their comfort zone, he became an inconvenience. He turned and walked out without another word. Duke waiting in the truck, tail thumping slowly. The night air felt thick, dense with judgment. As he opened the truck door, he heard small footsteps approach behind him. It was a boy, no older than 10. Brown curls, oversized sweatshirt, mismatched socks. He lived in the unit across from the Harpers. Shaq had seen him riding his scooter. Always quiet, always watching. The boy held out a folded piece of paper. I wasn't supposed to say anything, he whispered, eyes darting toward the hall. But they talk loud. In the garage. Shaq unfolded the note. They watch you.
They heard them. They know about the garage.
No name, no context. But the words chilled him deeper than any bag had. The boy took a step back and was gone before Shaq could ask a single question. Inside the cab, Duke climbed onto the passenger seat, resting his head on Shaq's thigh. For the first time in days, Shaq didn't feel anger. He felt something colder. A clarity. This wasn't over. And now, he had a direction. The red garage door had always bothered Shaq. Not because of its color, but because of its defiance. In a neighborhood dictated by beige siding, and carefully outlined HOA codes. A red garage was a choice. Brennan Crowley had painted it a year ago, right after his son was welcomed back to Pine Ridge, following a suspension for hate speech at a private school uptown. It was chalked up to a misunderstanding then. A poor joke among teens. He'd learned his lesson. They said, boys will be boys, and Brennan, an insurance adjuster with a firm handshake and quiet tongue, assured the neighborhood that his son had grown. Clean slate. Let the past die. Shaq didn't believe in slates anymore. Not after the second bag. Not after the meeting. Not after the note pressed into his hand by a boy too scared to speak above a whisper. They watch you. I heard them. I know about the garage. The next morning, he didn't walk Duke. He didn't wave at the mailman. He waited, sat in his truck parked down the block, watched as Brennan Crowley left in his beige Camry at exactly 8:07 a.m., as he did most weekdays, clipboard under his arm, dress shirt tucked into jeans, Bluetooth still flashing in his ear. The house emptied out. No sign of the son. No movement behind the curtain. Shaq waited another 30 minutes. Then he got out of the truck. There were no cameras outside Crowley's home. The lawn was too perfect. The shrubs trimmed into sterile geometry. But the security was passive. No digital locks. No motion sensors. Shaq had seen enough high-end homes to know that people with secrets often preferred the illusion of control over real protection. He walked up the driveway like he belonged there. Duke trailing close behind. No leash. Just trust. When they reached the garage, Shaq pulled from his hoodie pocket a small magnetic pick tool. He'd kept it from his days working with community security crews. A minute later, the side entry clicked open. Inside, it smelled like paint thinner and dust. Shaq flicked on a single overhead bulb, its chain swaying slightly. The garage looked normal, too normal. Boxes stacked in neat rows. A disassembled treadmill in one corner. A dartboard with no darts. But the wall on the far side, something about it didn't sit right. It was too clean. Drywall painted perfectly. But no shelves. No scuffs. No tool hooks. Just blank. Shaq approached and knocked softly. Hollow. He pressed his palm flat, dragging slowly from side to side. Then he felt it. A subtle shift in temperature. A draft, almost imperceptible, rising from the edge where the wall met the floor. He knelt, tapped again. The echo was too deep for solid foundation. He began running his fingers along the lower seams. There. A latch. He clicked it open, and the wall groaned slightly, revealing a hidden door, no more than 4 feet wide. Shaq ducked inside, heart pacing, and Duke remained just outside, his breathing shallow, ears perked. The hidden room was barely lit, just a desk lamp on a fold-out table, surrounded by corkboards and folders. Shaq took it in slowly, his gaze falling on photographs first. Dozens of them. Pine Ridge families. Mostly black. Some Latinx. Shot through telephoto lenses, grainy and invasive. Children playing in backyards. Women unloading groceries. Men washing cars. A few showed Shaq talking to neighbors, picking up trash on the trail, hugging his daughter. He stepped closer. A large corkboard had his name at the center, circled in red marker. String connected him to others, like a conspiracy web. Community influencer, asset, disruptor. Watch for shifts in tone. Notes lined the edges. Seen talking to HOA. Wife's grave visited bi-weekly. Dog becomes aggressive around scent. Each observation was dated, time-stamped. Shaq felt his chest tighten. This wasn't surveillance for insurance purposes. This was targeted, intentional, personal. Then he saw the file folders. Labels typed, sealed with colored tabs, some marked with yellow highlighters. He flipped through a few, Miss Tennyson, the Jeffersons, even the yoga instructor on Oak Hill. Each file included basic information, some financials, most likely pulled from open databases, but some included details that couldn't be public, medical histories, children's school records, adoption paperwork. And then there it was, a folder with his daughter's name. Shaq froze. Her name printed on a label, last name hyphenated, O'Neill Page, from her early days in the foster system. Before Alina finalized the adoption, Shaq opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were scanned forms he hadn't seen in years. Court petitions, psychological evaluations, private placement recommendations. One note at the bottom, biological family status, unknown, sealed records breached, See Brennan for original PDFs. How? These files were confidential. Only available through sealed court orders. Only he and Alina had copies. And Alina had passed years ago. He sat down, knees suddenly heavy. This wasn't just about racism anymore. This wasn't about a neighborhood trying to freeze him out. This was someone with access. Someone who had pulled strings. Someone who had been digging deep. Not to scare him randomly, but to dismantle him. Crowley hadn't just been watching. He'd been collecting, curating proof.
Of what Shaq didn't know yet.
But the room was a shrine to something hateful, disguised in structure, wrapped in precision, but fueled by obsession. And Shaq was the centerpiece. He stared at the file, unable to move, until Duke finally broke the moment. A short bark. A signal. Time was up. Shaq gathered what he could. His daughter's folder, 2 photos, 1 note, with a handwritten timestamp. No cameras, no alarms. Still, he moved fast. He relocked the door behind him, stepped into the light of day, just as a car turned down the street. Not Brennan's, but enough to tighten Shaq's steps. He climbed into his truck, Duke jumping in after him, and they pulled away without looking back. By the time he got home, the sun was leaning hard across the rooftops. Shadows long, windows watching. He placed the folder on the table, next to the bags. Then he stared out the window, knowing one thing for sure. This had never been random. And now he wasn't just a neighbor. He was a threat. The house was too quiet. That kind of silence that isn't peace but pressure, thick, low, pressing down on the walls like the house itself was holding its breath. Duke paced by the door, ears twitching. Shaq sat at the kitchen table, staring at the file in front of him. His daughter's name, Alina's signature, dates, codes, phrases that should have stayed locked behind court seals. His hands were still, but everything inside him was trembling. He hadn't cried when he found the first bag. He hadn't cried when they defaced Alina's photo. He hadn't even flinched when the community turned their backs in that meeting. But now, here in the dim of his own kitchen, surrounded by walls that once echoed laughter and smelled of cinnamon and oil paints, he broke. He stood up, walked slowly into the bedroom, pulled open the drawer by the nightstand, and took out her old flip phone. It was long dead, screen cracked, buttons soft from years of use. He kept it because she never changed the voicemail, and when the nights got heavy, he'd call it, just to hear her voice. He powered it on, plugged into the wall beside their bed. It blinked twice, then flickered to life with a quiet hum. He sat down on the floor beside the outlet and dialed. The rings felt longer than he remembered. Then, "Hey, you've reached Alina. If this is Shaq, I'm probably at the store, or lost in a sketchbook. Leave something sweet after the beep." Beep. He tried to speak, but his throat locked. When the words finally came, they came cracked, uneven. "I failed, baby," he whispered. "I told myself I could keep her safe, that I'd be enough, that if I stayed good, stayed helpful, if I kept my head down, the world would treat us better. But I can't protect her, not from this." The tears came slow, like they'd been waiting for permission. "I thought this place would be different," he said. "I really did. I thought if I gave enough, smiled enough, made everyone feel like I belonged, they'd let us be whole." He rested his head against the wall. "But they don't want us whole. They want us quiet." He hung up. Duke came over, laid beside him. Big, silent, loyal. Shaq looked up at the ceiling, let his mind drift, and suddenly he was 21 again. Back in Baton Rouge. The summer of '93. Fresh off a college high, drafted, future glowing like sunrise. And then the night. He'd been driving to meet a teammate, took a wrong exit, ended up in a neighborhood where a black man in a nice car didn't belong. Blue lights bloomed in the rear view like fireworks. He pulled over. No music. Hands on the wheel. Still. They came hard. Guns drawn. Voices yelling. "Get out." On the ground. Face in the asphalt. Knees pressing spine. One officer kept shouting, don't move," even when Shaq was already frozen. Someone said, "He fits the description." Someone else said, "Is that?" Then silence. He was let go. No apologies. No paperwork. He never told Alina. Never told his teammates. Just kept it sealed. Like so many other moments. The time a woman clutched her purse in an elevator. The time a white neighbor called the cops because he was walking too slow, past their house. The way agents warned him not to sound too political in interviews. The way fans stopped asking for autographs and started asking for explanations every time America caught fire. He remembered every bag he had carried. Not the leather duffels, not the Louis Vuitton travel sets, the invisible ones. The ones filled with grief, with restraint, with words unsaid, so white comfort could stay uninterrupted. Now the bags were real, black nylon, stuffed with symbols, with red paint, with defaced memories. A mockery of everything he tried to build. He stood and went to the garage. Sat on the edge of the steps. The house creaked. The wind moved through the trees like it was whispering warnings too late to matter. He thought about his daughter. The way she used to cling to Alina's hand when she first arrived. How long it took her to laugh without checking the room first. How Alina had taught her to paint messy free, no outlines. Shaq still had her first canvas. She'd titled it, "The World I Deserve." He had promised her that world. And now that world had been breached. He looked over at the bags again, sitting in a neat line on the garage floor. The image of his wife's face crossed out, the child's hoodie, the surveillance. It was never just about him. They'd reached into his memories, into his family. And what hurt most was that he had stayed silent too long, smiled too long, laughed when they needed truth, accepted their comfort over confrontation. He had played their kind giant, their safe black friend. And now, they didn't even flinch when he bled. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, breath shallow. This wasn't just a neighborhood problem. It wasn't just Pine Ridge. This was a slow-burning fire that had been passed down, masked in politeness, soaked in denial. From streets to schools, from whispers to meetings. Racism didn't always wear hoods anymore. Sometimes it wore pressed khakis and HOA badges. And silence. Shaq looked at the file one more time. His daughter's records, pages someone like Brennan Crowley had no right to see. He stood. Tomorrow he wouldn't wait. He wouldn't ask. He wouldn't explain. He would show them. Because the real weight wasn't just in the bags. It was in what no one wanted to admit they saw him carrying. Sunlight poured down on Pine Ridge like nothing had ever gone wrong there. The streets gleamed with flags and paper streamers. Kids wore matching shirts that read Founders Day United in Community. And rows of lawn chairs lined the sidewalks, legs crossed in patriotic neatness. Marching bands warmed up on side streets, brass horns blaring scales into the breeze. The smell of kettle corn and smoked brisket hovered in the air like a promise. Shaq stood at the edge of it all, arms crossed, face unreadable beneath the rim of his old ball cap. Duke sat at his heel, tail flicking against the pavement. Neither of them moved much, even as parents passed by with strollers and dogs barked in celebration. They were all here. Brennan Crowley, his son, face scrubbed clean, dressed in scout uniform like the past had never happened. The HOA president, clipboard in hand, barking cheerful orders. Neighbors who had smiled at him for years, then looked away when the bags appeared. Shaq scanned them, but not with malice, just clarity. He was done asking for decency. Today wasn't about them. Today was about the truth. He walked slowly through the crowd, eyes calm, posture loose, just another face at the celebration. No one noticed him slide around the stage. No one saw him pull the bag clean now, empty from his truck, and lay it neatly on the brick step beneath the podium. It looked harmless, forgotten, out of place, yet somehow ignored. Just like the first one. Duke stayed by the float, an old flatbed trailer dolled up with red, white, blue bunting. Speakers stacked on either side, ready to blast Sweet Georgia Brown once the pageant started. Only Shaq knew the audio feed had been rewired. Inside the float, tucked behind cardboard props and flags, sat a small digital recorder, timed and primed. He took his seat near the front. No clipboard, no badge, just presence. And then at 10:02 a.m., as the mayor's assistant walked up to the microphone, ready to welcome the crowd, it began. The voice wasn't hers. It wasn't a welcome. It was a whisper, low at first, then louder. He walks that dog like he owns the street. Laughter, faint and adolescent, followed by the creak of a garage door opening. Cameras stay pointed. He's too careful. Don't trust the big ones who smile all the time. The crowd paused, heads turned. The mayor's assistant looked back at the float, confused. The sound cut deeper. Files aren't hard to get if you know the right people. And I know the right people. They'll never trace it back to us. A long beat of silence. Then the son's voice again. He thinks he belongs here. The words shattered the pageantry. Gasps. A mother clutched her child's shoulder. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" But those who recognized the voices didn't ask. They knew. Their stillness betrayed them. The audio continued snippets from the garage, from the secret room where hate had been organized like paperwork. Laughter as the defaced photos were described, details about the adoption file, the hoodie, the bags, and then Brennan's voice measured, precise. Make it look like a warning, not a threat. We want fear, not a lawsuit. Don't leave prints, just reminders. The crowd began to fracture. Some stood frozen, faces pale. Others turned away. A few teenagers whooped in disbelief, half horrified, half entertained. Margaret, the HOA president, stepped forward, grabbing the microphone, trying to override the audio. But the truth was louder. It rolled over her voice like thunder across a pond, steady and relentless. You want change? Burn him with sympathy. Make him doubt his place. Let him beg for normalcy. That's how you erase a man. And then, silent. Shaq stood slowly, not dramatic, not loud. He just stepped forward and picked up the empty bag from beneath the podium, held it in one hand like a relic, then placed it on the stage, and walked away. No speech, no performance. Just presence. That was enough. As he passed through the crowd, some people turned their backs, others lowered their eyes. A man tried to speak. Wait, I didn't know, I thought. But Shaq didn't stop. Duke followed, tail still, eyes sharp. Some cried, some denied. But the real shift came when an old woman dressed in a Sunday blue dress with church gloves stepped out from under a shade tent. Her voice didn't shake. She looked at Shaq as he passed and said, almost to herself, I always knew. She said it without guilt, without apology, just truth. And maybe that was the most painful part of all. The audio had spread like fire, but justice didn't follow. Not right away, not like it should have. By the next morning, news vans lined the entrance to Pine Ridge, their cables snaking across sidewalks like invasive roots. Shaq watched them from behind his screen door, eyes steady as reporters mouthed words like shocking and unexpected. But it wasn't shocking, not to anyone who'd paid attention. The sheriff showed up late that afternoon, all puffed chest and forced concern. He didn't come alone. A deputy followed 2 steps behind, pen poised over a pad they'd barely use. They sat in Shaq's kitchen, drank his coffee, and told him they'd listened to the recordings, reviewed the surveillance photos, read the files he'd found in Crowley's hidden garage. And then came the line he had heard before, the one that always came when power protected itself. We believe something happened here, Mr. O'Neill. But legally, it's murky. Shaq leaned back in his chair. You heard them planning it. The voice print alone is enough to... There's no clear chain of custody, no proof the materials weren't planted. You broke into the house to retrieve evidence someone else never should have had. Still, that complicates things. Shaq stared at them both for a long moment. The sheriff shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. Brennan Crowley resigned from his job this morning. He's left town. Just like that? Shaq asked. He disappears and you let him? We can't arrest a man on moral outrage, Shaq. We need viable charges. Jurisdiction. Cooperation from the DA. The words were smooth. Rehearsed. Legal armor. Then what do I tell my daughter? Shaq asked, voice quiet. The sheriff didn't answer. He set down his mug, nodded once, and left with a handshake that felt more like a dismissal. That night, Shaq walked home from the grocery store to find the air thick with smoke and a ring of black char staining the wood of his front porch. The remnants of a small fire had eaten through one corner, controlled, but intentional. Someone had set it and waited for it to burn just long enough to say, we're still watching. He didn't call the fire department. He didn't call anyone. He sat beside Duke on the porch steps, watching the moon rise behind the ridge. No neighbors came out. No voices broke the dark. Pine Ridge had gone back to pretending. By morning, they were pretending louder. A vigil appeared on his lawn before noon. Candles, flowers, signs that read, unity, and stand together. A woman he'd never spoken to placed a balloon shaped like a dove on his mailbox. Children, confused, were dragged along by parents with tight smiles. Someone sang an off-key version of Amazing Grace. The press showed up again, panning over the crowd, capturing tears and long hugs. They didn't ask Shaq to speak. They didn't want his version. They wanted the footage, the symbolism, the scene. Margaret from the HOA took the microphone and said, we are better than this. Shaq stood inside his living room and watched from behind a curtain. Duke sat beside him, head on his paws, not moving. And just when Shaq thought the show had reached its final act, something different happened. A car pulled up across the street. The engine sputtered out. 3 teenage boys stepped out, white, nervous, but determined. They carried backpacks, heavy with something. They didn't join the vigil. They walked straight to Shaq's porch and stopped. One of them, red-haired Freckles, reached into his bag and pulled out a duffel. A black one. Then another did the same. And the third. 3 bags. Just like the first. Shaq opened the door and stepped outside. The crowd at the vigil turned, some gasping, some inching closer. But the boys didn't flinch. "We helped him," the red-haired one said. "Crawley, his kid, they made us." Shaq said nothing. "They said it was just a joke at first. Just a scare," the taller boy added. "Then it got darker. But we didn't know how to get out. Not till we saw the float, and what you played." The third boy opened his backpack. Inside were more photos, more lists, some with notes, others with printed maps of local parks, school bus routes, and racial data pulled from public records. "We were scared," he whispered. "So was I," Shaq replied, voice steady. Behind him, the vigil finally fell silent. Later that night, the boys stayed and talked. Their stories didn't soften anything, but they sharpened the truth. They hadn't acted alone. Other kids had been recruited, encouraged to treat it like a game, earn status by making Shaq uncomfortable, get recognition by targeting others who didn't fit the neighborhood vision. Brennan Crawley and his son had built a quiet culture, low-key racism, wrapped in dares and secrecy, and they'd used other kids to carry it out. The sheriff had no choice now. This time, it wasn't just Shaq's word. It was theirs too. Investigations reopened. Media shifted. The vigil candles burned out. But something real took their place. The museum wasn't much yet. Just steel bones, half-framed drywall, and a banner that read Pine Ridge Community History Center. Opening soon, pinned above the entrance. But it was happening. People had given, quietly, yes, some anonymously, but the money came in after the recordings. After the boys came forward. After the news anchors moved on, and the cameras packed up. Shaq stood beneath that banner now, sleeves rolled, gloves on, lifting the third and final duffel bag from the bed of his truck. The air was cooler than usual for Georgia. The sky held that dusty orange tone, like the sun was trying to remember what came next. Duke hopped down beside him, slower than he used to be, stiff in the hips, but still proud, still alert. They moved together toward the exhibit space that would one day house everything. The bags, the photos, the files, the recordings, and the truth. Inside the unfinished building, a glass case waited. Clean, empty, red. Shaq placed the bag down gently. Then the others beside it, one by one. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence had never been weakness. It had just been misunderstood. Now, the bags spoke for themselves. Duke let out a soft growl, then a single bark, low and resonant. Shaq turned, and his eyes followed the sound across the street, to that bench, the one where it all started, where the first bag had waited like a riddle wrapped in nylon, where Duke had barked loud enough to wake a lie sleeping beneath the sidewalks of Pine Ridge. They walked over, slowly. The grass had grown taller around the bench, less tended now, like even the landscapers weren't quite sure what to do with the memory it held. Shaq sat. Duke laid down, front paws stretched, panting softly. A few seconds passed. Then a small voice behind him broke the quiet. "Excuse me?" Shaq turned his head and saw a little girl standing just a few feet away. 5, maybe 6, but racial, hair in tight curls, wearing a t-shirt with glittery letters that read "Fearless." Her mom waited a few yards back, smiling gently, unsure whether to step in. Shaq smiled and motioned for the girl to come closer. She pointed at the bag in the glass case through the open museum doors.
Why was the bag so bad?
Shaq exhaled. Not a sigh. More like a slow release. The kind that lets a weight leave the chest after it's sat there too long. He patted the bench beside him. She climbed up.
That bag, he said, was empty when we placed it there today. But once, it was filled with things meant to scare people like me. Not with monsters or knives or loud noises, but with messages. Ones that whispered, "You don't belong here." The girl tilted her head, puzzled. But why would someone say that? "You're nice." Shaq smiled again, this time slower. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't need a reason to fear you.
Sometimes the way you walk, the way you talk, or even just the color of your skin is enough for them to see a threat instead of a neighbor. Her eyes dropped to the grass. He continued, but we can't let those messages win. We name them, we show them, we put them in glass, so they don't hide in shadows anymore. She looked up again. Is that why the dog barked? Shaq nodded. Duke always knew something was wrong. Before I did. Sometimes, dogs hear what hearts ignore. A moment passed. Then the girl reached down and pet Duke softly. He let her. What's your name? Shaq asked. Lila, she said. Well, Leila, Shaq said, rising slowly from the bench. You keep asking questions like that, and you're going to help a lot more people than I ever could. She beamed. I want to be a teacher. Or a painter. Or maybe both. Then you'll be dangerous. He chuckled. Her mom called gently, and Lila waved as she ran off. Shaq stood there watching her disappear around the path, her little feet bouncing like truths finally unburdened. He looked back at the bench. The wind stirred the grass. Somewhere behind him, a nail gun cracked against new wood, as workers continued building the museum. And Duke gave one last bark, short and sharp, eyes trained on nothing, or maybe on something Shaq couldn't see. He nodded. Some memories need space. Some wounds need walls. Some warnings need sound. As he walked back to the truck, Duke lumbering behind him, Shaq didn't look back. He didn't need to. The bags weren't on his shoulders anymore. They were right where they belonged. In glass. In light. In truth. And just before he stepped into the cab, he said it soft enough for the breeze to carry. Some bags ain't meant to be carried alone. And some barks ain't just noise. They're warnings. Some truths bark before they burn. If this story shook something loose in you, don't turn away. Watch what happens when silence is broken, and history answers back. This isn't just fiction. It's a mirror. Stay with us. The next chapter is already listening.